Okay, this video is going to be about how I built my first vet team and what I did before that and how it went. So before ever going to vet, I played a couple seasons on some other people's teams, and I played maybe 4 or 5 seasons of just rookie, a couple times with CPU teams, sometimes with multiple teams, just testing out a bunch of different things and trying to learn the mechanics of how this game works. And in the meantime, I also did a lot of VOD review of and game review of the higher tier teams, specifically studying the teams that at that time were the greats. So I watched all of the head-to-head matchups between Hawaii, the Hawaii Bulls, Kentucky Mountaineers, Southside Rebels, Kansas City Crowns, Miami Super Cobras, and I learned how mechanics were different from rookie and vet, what the best teams leaned upon for their success, and what they did to counter each other's win conditions. So at that time, Kentucky was, I would say, the undisputed number one, and their biggest strength was getting sacks and getting interceptions. So offensively, I decided that I would build a team to never get sacks and never throw interceptions. I also wanted to make all the points other teams spent in pass rush and coverage, which is probably most of the points they spend on defense. I wanted to nullify all that, so I decided to go all run. And it's something I'd already been experimenting with in rookie, so we just took it all the way to vet. At that time, I did not know what tags were, and we can get into that later. So, technically, all an offense has to do to score is to continuously get first downs, and I figured with how much teams invest in stopping the pass, I could just brute force first downs with inside runs for 3.5 yards per carry per. So I built this team. This used to be called Olympus Brood. Now it's called Spamalot. But back in season 58 and the seasons before that, it was Brood. Based upon an extremely slow power halfback with a superstar purely run blocking offensive line. And a big reason for this is also because against the very, very best coaches, the ones that you'll be facing for championships, you cannot rely exclusively or too much on misdirection or trickery, because they are just as good as you, if not better. I figured the trade-off I get when you go all run or any kind of pure offense, you give up any possibility of trickery because you cannot run other plays. If I go all run, I literally can't pass. I mean, it'll be terrible if I do. So I traded the ability to confuse my opponents in exchange for just brute force, where it doesn't matter if they see it coming if they can't stop it. Um, tags are a wrench in that plan, but we'll get to that. So defensively, I applied the same philosophy. Find a way to invest in skills that work regardless of whether a team runs or passes. And there is one constant across all play types. At the end of the play, somebody gets hit. And it doesn't matter whether it's a run, doesn't matter whether it's a pass. If you focus on knocking the ball loose, no matter what team you face, no matter if you face yourself and you are trying to catch a defense off guard by calling play types that they are not prepared for, you will still perform well against that. So I built a defense to knock the piss out of any offensive player that touches the ball. So these are the players that were on this team. The quarterback was actually pretty bad. In rookie, running quarterbacks are actually pretty strong. And sophomore is true too, but once you get close to vet, they're actually, unless they're superstars, unless you build around them, they're actually pretty useless. So this was initially meant to be a backup plan for the running back, but at some point, the outside runs stopped working, and because you have a very slow running back blocking for a very fast halfback, it just didn't work. So this guy just never got used. He threw some screen passes occasionally, but for the most part, he's just a leadership butt to keep people's morale high and energy. The running back, these are all retired now because this was a long time ago. Uh, Pure power. The play isn't over until you fall down, and so balance keeps you from falling. I went full balance. None of us are 100% certain how the mechanics of the game works. We don't actually know that certain skills interact in certain ways, but I assume that balance is what keeps you standing up, and as long as you're still standing, you can keep breaking tackles and falling forwards. That's what you want if you're literally just trying to run Lombardi type up the middle. Footwork aids you with your balance. A little bit of elusiveness because you have good angles and makes them hard to tackle. You combine this with toughness to stay healthy, awareness to take good angles, but also these two are mostly here for powering brace for impact and Mr. Reliable and keeping you from fumbling. This should have actually been higher because with the volume that you run at an all-run team, power backs in this game, because they take on tackles directly, tend to fumble far more than elusives. My current elusive running back has 43 carry grip and only brace for impact, and fumbles, even with probably more carries, less than once, maybe every 2 games. Whereas this running back with massive carry grip, massive toughness, and 2 gold essays devoted to not fumbling, fumbles more than once a game, and at one point was fumbling like 1.5 times a game, which is insane. But you have to do that with it. The whole point of all run is that you don't turn the ball over, and there's nothing they can possibly do to make you turn the ball over unless they're a purely power hitting defense. So it's very important for your theme and for your identity that you don't fumble. So we tried to invest as much as we could in that. Sprinting is low because you don't need to be fast enough to run for touchdowns. You just need to get 3.5 yards. As long as you can do that, the drive never ends, and you will always, literally always score. Also, the slower you are, the slower your blockers can be. And if you have slower blockers, that allows you to put more points in more important things like winning blocks or knocking people over or wearing them out, which gives them more time to engage in blocks, which they should be winning because they're better at, which is demoralizing the defense further, which is making it easier to block them and also harder for the defense to tackle. So that's the running back. He was the star of the team. He didn't have as crazy as an average as some running backs that you see that specialize in outside runs, because he doesn't run for 100-yard touchdowns ever. But an average like this is enough to keep you going. If you take out the CPU games, it's still a pretty good average. And he wins games. That's really the point. He's not going to make the Hall of Fame, but he will win games. So we had 2 fullbacks. This is just one of them. It's 2 to keep them fresh with the conditioning. Basically, it's pretty simple. Just get the angle. And these fullbacks are not built like the fullbacks I build now. They are built to actually win blocks because the running back is so slow. So they can just focus on that. If they can get 2 people in a single play, if they can win 1 block, knock them down, and get somebody else, then you still can actually run for touchdowns. The tight end and wide receiver are blockers. Pretty standard all run. More tech than power because specifically when you have a very slow halfback, if you have too much power on your wide receivers, the cornerback will get knocked down, the wide receiver will leave to go block someone else, and the slow-ass halfback will get there as the cornerback is getting up and get tackled. So you always want to have more tech when you have a very slow runner. The offensive line was the bread and butter of the team. I've always been a believer in line first, defensively and offensively, primarily because no matter the play type, the line is relevant and as close to the play as possible on every single play. So whether it's a run or a pass, the offensive line and the defensive line, in my opinion, are the stars of the play. So these are some very strong run blockers. 100 tech, 90 power, 100 tech, 84 power, because guards have more points for run blocking than centers, also more than tackles, but as much as possible. 3 run blocking SAs. This one is to prevent shed block, which is your kryptonite. This one is to obviously knock some people over, and this one is to drive them back, because it forces secondary players, linebackers, and safeties to take bad angles when they run into their own teammates. This offensive line, without this team would not have worked. They basically had to destroy the defensive line for this to happen. And as you can see, they're pancakes, 200 to 35 in a season. That's what you want to see out of an offensive tackle. So, okay, that was the offense. The defense. So since we're focused on spending all of our points on skills that are good no matter what the play type is, we are preparing for everything. It's all focused on power hitting. But the problem with that is that a team with safeties and cornerbacks specifically and linebackers based around power hitting doesn't have any ball skills or any coverage. So we compensate for that with an insane pass rush. So when scouting the top teams, I noticed one trend in particular, that the highest yards per carry by far came on outside runs with pulling linemen, especially one wide receiver, which is problematic to defend for many reasons. One wide receiver is my favorite offensive formation personally, because you can run either side, to the outside, to the inside, off tackle with great success, and there are still a lot of very threatening passes that come out of that. Man defense in particular has a difficult time defending the strong side. Zone has a tough time defending the weak side, but even man has a hard time defending the weak, and even zone has a hard time defending the strong. So it's because everything is stacked so closely. So to deal with this, I use 5-2 against these plays. I talked about this in Ajam's video, which I will link. But on those plays in particular where there's a pulling guard, the defensive tackle will shoot the gap created by it, and if they're fast enough, and if they wait long enough for the guard to get out of the way, so you can't have too much snap. But if they're fast enough, they get a tackle for loss on the quarterback before they can even hand the ball off or pitch it. So the defensive tackles, both of them, there's 2 of them. This is just one of them. Unbrewed, we're built with that in mind. More speed focused, and not a lot of awareness, because their job was not to read the running back at all. It was simply to get to the quarterback as fast as possible. And the guards are not intelligent enough to chip them as they run by, so they just get a straight shot. Here's the build. We don't put as much into pass rush tech because we are going tunnel for the extra speed, and we just want tunnel to fire as much as possible. So the fact that it's powered by pass rush power is why we put so much here. We will get to the quarterback just fine. So to give some extra insurance on that, we went with spin, but the caps weren't enough with how much we were devoting to speed and to snap to put any more points in pass rush tech. Obviously, I would have done this differently if I had known some other things, and in the future I did do this differently, but you don't really need 100 snap. First strike is kind of broken in that the active ability of reducing morale doesn't work. But in theory, if you read what first strike does, you would think that building a team around this is really, really strong. And specifically for this to work, you have to have more snap than your opponent, which is why at the time I thought that it was mandatory that I have 100, because if somebody else, if I have 99 and they have 100, you won't get the active effect. So that was the idea behind this. We didn't put a lot of run blocking on them because 5-2 is already strong defense against interior runs because you crowd the line of scrimmage um, and you have a blocker on a blocker. And it's very difficult to find a lane when there's 5 defensive linemen instead of like 3 or 4. Defensive end, they don't have the same responsibilities as the defensive tackles because tackles on the offensive side pull much less often than guards, although there are still a few good plays. So these were free to focus more on a balance build. That's why we don't go tunnel, because we actually do want to play the run without running by the running back. Spin and shed block are commonly seen together because they are both footwork reliant. So you get some synergy in the build. They still play the run. In retrospect, well, there's a lot of things I would do differently. That's why Brood was eventually reset after 2 seasons, because there were in creating it there were a lot of miscalculations and things that work out in theory that didn't work out in practice. One of those major things is these guys actually don't need to be crazy good run defenders. I mean, it helps, but when you're only rushing 4 in every play, you don't necessarily need it, especially when your entire defense is built to defend the run first and foremost. So just pretty standard defensive end builds. They did pretty well. 40-ish sacks a season. Lots of tackles, some tackles for a loss. No rev kicks because they're not tunnel, but did well. Basically, they get to the quarterback, they do their job. This is the nose tackle, only used when I play 5-2. Since the defensive tackles have poor interior run defense, this one compensates for it. Beat down, shed block. Tunnel vision is because even if they call a pass play and even if they call a run play, the pancakes, or the rev cakes rather, on the center really add up, especially when this guy isn't even playing, because demoralizing the offensive line like that allows you to just continuously stack advantages. So even if they call a bunch of pass plays from the 5-2, he will still help improve your run defense by demoralizing the center. His job is not to tackle. We actually specifically don't want any of the defensive line to tackle, because you want to funnel all your tackles to the players that can actually knock the ball out. The defensive ends and defensive tackles do have some tackling, because there were some teams that were causing us a lot of problems with shed sack, specifically superstar shed sack quarterbacks, that we would send 4 and the quarterback would break the tackle from all the blitzers and then just bomb it. And we can't have that when we don't have any pass defense. The power hitting defense only works if they catch the ball in front of you, not if they catch the ball over you. So some of them needed tackling, but this one did not. Okay. Safeties are pretty simple. Run fast, hit hard. Everybody understands that. We didn't take very much awareness because you want slow reactions. Slow reactions mean later hits, which means that instead of a knock loose, which would be from an immediate hit, you get a fumble because the receiver has time to secure the ball. We want fumbles, we don't want knock loose. We took resolute to make up for the fact that we have low pursuit. We don't want to be beaten by elusives, and it also actually had an added benefit of when an elusive is trying to juke you out or slowing down to make a cut or make a move, resolute will fire and you will just run directly at the elusive without getting fooled, because it stops all stuns and fakes, and they are not practicing good ball security during those moves, and it allows you to get some pretty crazy hits. Brick wall and monster hit, in retrospect, was maybe a bit excessive because they interfere with each other and require a lot of points and toughness on a safety, which is not particularly good. It's kind of wasted. Safeties don't really make any use out of that. Obviously, like I said, I would build this differently if I could, but for the first time, monster hit only fires 50% of the time. I just wanted as many hits as possible. Otherwise, the defense wouldn't work. So that was the theme. How many fumbles did they get? Honestly, not that many. That was something else that I learned, is that forcing fumbles in this game is not as easy as you would maybe want it to be. Uh, Pretty much all of the linebackers, cornerbacks, and safeties are built in the same mold. The linebackers and cornerbacks are not supers, and the safeties are because the safeties are last line of defense. Once again, the whole point of the defense, honestly, it's more about run defense. It wasn't so much about trying to be equal across them. It was trying to play the pass like incidentally while playing the run. It's like you choose to play the run first and foremost because you think that your offense is the best offense and you want to be able to beat yourself. But if teams that pass against you, you would like to still have an answer for them, and the answer was power hitting. And honestly, we'll get to how well this team performed, but against teams that had really strong passing attacks, it actually performed surprisingly well. So, linebackers, same thing. Some ball skills, some awareness, but really as little as possible. Okay, punter. This one was fun. I know some will swear that Inspire Fear does nothing for them, but for a team that is built on the concept of power hitting, there wasn't a lot of depth on this team, so the defense usually played special teams. When you combine the intimidation and the loss of carry grip with the power hitting on special teams, there were a lot of fumbles forced off of punts. So I do not regret this build at all. I thought this player was amazing. 100 intim, golden spire fear, 100 punt power. You just get a full head of steam, coverage commander for the sprint. You kick it real far, your team runs real fast, and then they hit real hard. The kicker is pretty generic. These two were for reducing weather effects, which I feel are one of the biggest issues of kicking, and then some coverage. Mostly focused on kicking well. Some will swear by good kickoffs. I personally feel that the field position lost by missed field goals and the points lost offsets any field position you gained from having better kickoffs. So focus entirely on the field goals and not so much on the kickoff. But there is merit to going full kickoff power. And then this is an example of a special teamer. To make the roster work with so many superstars, especially on the offensive line, we had to have a bunch of low salary, minimal cost players to play special teams. Turns out they actually make really great blockers. You get a lot of special teams touchdowns. We had about 30 special teams touchdowns each season. And you want to have pretty much equal distribution between pass blocking and run blocking because in this game the way special teams works is it does not use just run blocking. It'll use the average of both so that all run teams don't have an unfair advantage and all pass teams are not at a disadvantage. They also specialize in morale and energy destruction because they also play stuff like field goals and things like that. So, yeah, fun players. Beatdown. And they got a decent number of pancakes, actually, because usually special teamers, less effort is put into special teams, so you find yourself matched up against players that really shouldn't be there. So, yeah, overall, how did this first team do? I would say pretty well, but not. I would say it was also pretty significantly a disappointment. That's why I reset it after only 2 seasons. It did go 30-0 in its first vet season, but it lost in the playoffs. Shout out to Viper and DL Kurt. It went 27-3 in its second season, and it won the championship, but it lost a bunch of ladder games. Twice to Rhode Island Falcons, and once to Czars with the New Jags. Many of its wins, however, were too close, especially in its first season. And I would say a lot of them came down to quite a bit of luck that was not necessarily deserved. Especially, I mean, that's going to happen when you're like an RNG kind of random event-based team, what with forced fumbles and breaking tackles with your running back. So I understand that the luck goes both ways and is to be expected. Some of these losses could have been wins, so on and so forth. still, it was not quite enough because, in theory, this team should have been, well, in my mind, it should have been impossible to stop. So the pass defense based on monster hit was not quite enough to stop some of the best passing offenses, although it did. Because monster hit demoralizes receivers, regardless of whether they catch the ball or not. You're getting the monster hits eventually tanks morale and energy of the players getting hit, especially because they don't have brace or impact. But brace or impact was a big problem. I'll show you why. So this, for those who don't know, this particular essay used to block 100% of energy and morale losses until last season or the season before. So players getting monster hit would not lose any morale or energy at all as long as this fired. And on most running backs, I would say maybe every running back has brace for impact at gold, or almost every running back, meaning that all the effort put into monster hit was pretty much useless because they would always just brace. Fortunately, I believe Alex led in getting this nerfed, so monster hitting defenses are better now than they were back then. On the offensive side, the team failed a lot of times, especially against the Rhode Island Falcons and against Nebraska Cornhuskers, because of the fact that run tags are a mechanic in this game that if you on a defensive play call you can tag pass, run, pass, or run. Pass run does nothing. It just keeps your players the way they are. Pass tag will make them better against a play if it's a pass, and run tag will make them better if it's a run, and then conversely, bad against the play if it's the opposite. The thing about run tags is it doesn't just affect your players' awareness. It doesn't just key them in that a run is happening. It also makes them like gods at shedding blocks and tackling and all sorts of things that are unrelated to whether they know that it's a run. So this offensive line of like 190, 180 blocking stats would get completely destroyed by teams with like 80, 50 blocking stats. And there's not a lot you can do about that. Back in the day, it used to be that halfback screens counted as passes. So we did adapt towards the end. It was right about here that we discovered like how strong tags really were. Alex had been telling me somewhat for a while, but I don't think I was understanding correctly. But we lost to full run tags here, but then in the next game we called full all screens, or not completely all screens, but half or more, and we won. And then we didn't call screens and we lost. But in this game against Kentucky, I'm fairly certain that they run tagged, and this game was 100% screenplays. And like I mentioned, if you guess wrong, if you run tag but they call a pass, you will not be able to tackle and you will not be able to stop the blockers. You will get pancaked all the time. And Kentucky called run, and screens did not count as runs, even though they probably should, and they do now. And so it was pretty easy for the offense to just roll. But yeah, a lot of teams also discovered some pretty clever ways to defend interior runs, so it forced us to call plays that we didn't want to call. We could not just run up the middle every single time. This is not Madden. This is not real life football. And so yeah, that was pretty much what happened. But overall, it went well. There were issues, and it was worth resetting because right about this point, you just have a lot of ideas for things you want to improve, and you're just not patient enough to see it out. So a reset was in order. You don't stop until your team is good enough for you. So lessons for the next run, which would become Spamalot, which is what it is now. The goal is still to run up the middle for 3.5 yards per, but the methods have to change. You need a running back that can make better use of strong run blocking, specifically more mobility and more vision. You just need them to follow the damn block. You don't really want to focus too much on breaking tackles because breaking tackles doesn't work if they tag you right. You don't want to exclusively run up the middle because they can just stack the box. So you need a running back that can run to the outside. Uh, you also need to make the most out of any opportunities you get. There were a lot of times that Tarask, the running back from Brood, would almost break free for a touchdown, but would get caught. So I went with a running back that really just focused on lots of body control, speed, and awareness, which is the Beast, who is doing fairly well. He's only in his third out of 5 seasons in vet, and he's 12th all-time offense, so he's doing okay. I would say the theory worked, and we will get into that in a future video. But point is, it was worth resetting Brood because Tarask was not able to do what the offense needed to be successful. Defensively, well, before we get to defense, the QB also had to change because of how important screens are, especially with tags. The QB on this team was completely useless at first, so we designed Alex's player, the Holy Hand Grenade. He's different now, but he used to be purely devoted to shed sack. He was made to take the heat on screens, demoralize some defensive linemen, make sure that the screen always got off without a hitch. Defensively, I found that even with a defense like this, based around hits, I was calling certain plays because of the alignments and the positioning pretty much all the time. One of those plays was 5-2 under Sam, which everyone who currently plays now will know that is the reason why Spamalot is named Spamalot, is the defensive play that we spam every time. Because I was calling this play with a defense that was not meant to run it, so I figured why not just make one to run it. As a man defense, which is what 5-2 under Sam is, the goal, you can make turnover-based man defenses, but the goal for me was to force continuous 3 and outs. So for this team, we needed to have a defense with no weak link, because it doesn't matter if every player but one is capable of handling their assignment. If there's one weak link on a 3 and out focused defense, the rest of the defense is basically null, because you're not going to get turnovers and you're not going to stop them. It's actually just useless. So we went for full superstar defense. Saved a lot of cap space by not having a superstar offensive line, because you don't need that with a fast running back. And thus Spamalot was born, which will be a topic for next time.